quickly if they were going to come back in the polls and really try to be able to overtake former President Trump. Hallie.
Of course, the Democratic National Convention is set to begin just 4 weeks from tomorrow, with a massive question now about what that convention looks like, who delivers, of course, that critical primetime speech accepting the Democratic nomination for the presidency. Kristen, I have to wonder here, and I know that our teams are still reporting this out, every time we have seen President Biden publicly over the course of the last several weeks, Kristen, he has struck a defiant tone. His campaign, his top leadership has suggested that he and they were frankly dug in, looking at where the polling numbers were, looking at, as they described it, the millions of Americans who chose to elect Joe Biden and who voted for him, of course, in that primary process. Do we have any sense, Kristen, yet of what has changed in the mind of President Biden? I know we have some reporting over the course of the last several days that top Democratic leadership, including former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, top Senate Democrat Chuck Schumer, expressed to the president privately that polling showed he was unlikely to win come November. Might that have had an impact?
I think that was ultimately what compelled President Biden to reach this decision, what had to be an excruciating decision, Hallie, because he was incredibly defiant that he was not going to drop out of the race. But you're absolutely right. The fact that there seemed to be this coordinated effort by Democratic leadership, Nancy Pelosi, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer, frankly, former President Obama expressing concerns privately about the state of his candidacy, and all of that pressure, plus the reality check. He was shown really difficult polling nationally in key battleground states that suggested he wouldn't be able to.
Kristen, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Kristen, but we have some other breaking news here as we're talking about this question of what's next. President Biden is now endorsing his vice president, Kamala Harris, to be the nominee of the Democratic Party this year. I want to read now what the president says himself. In a post on X, formerly known as Twitter, he says, he reiterates he's decided not to accept the nomination and to focus his energies on his duties as president for the remainder of his term. He goes on to say that his first decision as the party nominee in 2020 was to pick Kamala Harris as my vice president. He says, and it's been the best decision I've made. Today, he says, I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be the nominee of our party this year. He concludes by saying, and again, this is President Biden saying, Democrats, it's time to come together and beat Trump. Let's do this. So, Kristen, we now have our moderator of Meet the Press joining us on the phone. We now have a real answer now to the question that we've had ever since this news broke that President Biden is withdrawn from this race. He is endorsing Kamala Harris to take the top of the ticket. What does the process look like from here? She obviously now would have to suggest or select, I should say, a running mate, Kristen, which is another process that'll have to unfold over the course of the next couple of weeks before the Democratic convention.
That's right. And